Hello and good evening, everyone. This is Suzanne Knabe-Nicole from Police Science Doctor. And as promised this evening, I'm here with Professor Jane Monckton-Smith from the University of Gloucestershire. So we're going to be talking about domestic homicide and the pattern of coercive control and how it can lead to domestic homicide and everything related to that. Professor Jane Monckton-Smith is going to have a book coming out very soon that you might well be interested in. It's called In Control, Dangerous Relationships and How They End in Murder. Now, wherever you're watching this, so you might be on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. If you're here with us live, please come and say hello in the comments if you wish. And if you want to ask a question, if I manage to pick it up, then I might pass it on to Professor Monckton-Smith, and we might be able to get an answer for you if we have time. So now over to you, Jane. Please introduce yourself. Who are you and why might people know you?
Right, I think you said my name, Professor Jane Monckton-Smith. I'm Professor of Public Protection at the University of Gloucestershire, and my specialism actually is homicide. I think that people might know me because I get outside of the university and do a lot of outside work. So I work with a lot of bereaved families and I work with the police. So I'm really lucky that my job is quite diverse. So yeah, I get to meet a lot of people in the sector, so it's really nice.
What was your academic journey? So what did you start out studying? How did you then move into the field of domestic abuse?
Well, I actually started, in the world of crime, as it were, when I was a police officer, way back in the 1980s, when things were very different to the way that they are now. But I suppose it was that grounding in crime that when I actually decided to start studying, I was a very late starter studying. I was in my 30s. I thought it was, yeah, let's do crime because I know something about it. I'm really interested in it. And then when I started studying it, when I did my degree in criminology, that was it then. It became a passion. But when I started thinking about some of my experiences in the police and then started looking at some of the subject matter in criminology, especially violence against women, I think the thing that made me start studying homicide and the way that I have studied it is I just started to get really angry, really angry that we didn't respond better to violence against women, and it's just become a passion, and now it's just my whole life. And so I started off studying all sorts of homicide, but through my work with charities, the homicide charities, I became very interested in domestic homicide or intimate partner homicide, and that's where I focus most of the time now.
And how much time did you spend in the police? And were you studying part-time and then left to become a full-time academic, or did you just finish policing?
No, it's a bit of a bumpy journey. So, I would say anybody out there who thinks that they can't study or, academia is not for them, I used to think that as well. And I had quite a big gap in between leaving the police and starting to study. The reason I started studying was because I was having my children at the time, and I was, I suppose you'd call it stuck at home, but I just really wanted to do something. So I started studying criminology then. So it's been a really bumpy ride. I didn't go straight into academia. I had a big gap in between. And I went to, where I went to study, there were some lecturers there who had also come from like the probation service, hadn't been always academics. And I think it's really important that you look at someone and you think, actually, that's a role model for me. I can actually see myself having a space in academia, even though I'm not traditional in the way that I've come in or the way that I think or anything else. So yeah, I think it was looking at them and thinking, yeah, I can do that. I can be that. And they were angry people too, angry, passionate people. So that's probably, that said to me, it's okay. It's okay to be a researcher and be researching because you're angry and you want to change something.
I think many good ideas are born out of a need, out of a frustration, out of a solution not being there. And then you may be thinking, actually, I do have that solution. Like with me, why I started Police Science Doctor was not because I was angry. It was because I was frustrated and baffled that students and academics get to read all that amazing research, all those findings that researchers have gathered, in methodologically sound ways. All this information on how you could do better in policing, for example, how you can investigate better, how you can help witnesses remember better, how you can support suspects to open up an interview. But that research is mainly being shared amongst researchers and students, and it doesn't usually get to the practitioner. So what I do is basically I translate that research and turn it into videos, turn it into podcasts, turn it into transcripts, so people can actually consume that without having the subscription to the research publishers. So it was frustration rather than anger, but I think it's always a good fuel, isn't it? So what exactly was it that you were angry about? You mentioned earlier that you were angry at how you treated the victims, or how you treated the crimes against women?
I think it was the disinterest in violence against women. There wasn't enough interest, and there wasn't. I was outraged by it. So I couldn't understand why other people weren't, and that's kind of driven my journey. And I think I'm very similar to you in a lot of ways. You talked about how the research is closely guarded almost. Nobody can get to it. And sometimes even when you get to it, you can't understand it. I still read academic papers now and I think, oh my God, am I an imposter? I mean, I just don't get this. I don't understand it. So what it must be like for somebody who's not used to the way that academics articulate the things they're trying to talk about, that is yet another barrier. So you've got more than the barrier of just not being able to get to the journals. When you get to them, can you understand them? And it was incredibly important to me that when you're talking about something like violence and homicide and how we keep ourselves safe, that those messages are sent out there in a very accessible way, in ways that the public, rather than just academics and professionals, because professionals don't go looking at journals all the time either, do they? And I've got this real passion to make my research accessible to anyone who needs it.
So tell us a little bit more about that research then. What have you focused on, and what have been your main points and your main findings in all of that?
Well, I've done a few research projects, but I suppose my latest one, which was the homicide timeline, is one that I thought was too important not to get out there, because we don't understand domestic abuse, we don't understand coercive control, and yet it's not beyond us to understand it. So it just means joining up the dots, or putting the jigsaw pieces together. And I did have access to the research, and I did have access to those conversations within academia that helped me understand it, helped me on my journey to understanding it. So that's really what I wanted to do. So I knew that so many homicides are happening, and I was working as a domestic homicide review chair. I was reviewing homicides for the police and coroners, and I just kept seeing this pattern, this constant pattern repeating itself, and it was so common. I was thinking, there's just got to be something in this that we're just not either acknowledging or recognizing at all. So I looked, I think it was There was around 400 cases of homicide, and pulled out the typical chronology, the typical journey that the killer takes from even before they meet the person to when the homicide happens. And I thought, well, the best way to set it out is a chronology. Let's put it into stages. And we made like a graphic of it, like on an A4 page, and just put it out there. And people just started saying to me, "Oh my God, this is my life. This is my life. I recognize my life." And I think with domestic abuse, you can feel like you're in the middle of a chaotic situation. But what the timeline does is remove the chaos and give it some structure. And then people understand what's happening to them. And if they understand what's happening to them, they're empowered maybe to know the best way to deal with it.
So I guess I speak for all the viewers at the moment. Tell us what the pattern is. What is the timeline? Because I'm sure that most people were not aware that there is any pattern to it or any rhyme or reason.
Well, I put it into an 8-stage, what I call timeline. So it's a sequence where stage 1, and you get to stage 0. So stage 1 is the person, stage 8 is the person committing a murder. What happens in between those 2 stages? So do you want me to go through the 8 of them? Yeah. So the first stage I call history. So that means somebody has a history that makes them more likely to commit a murder. So that history would be things like a history of domestic abuse, a history of coercive control or stalking, a criminal history, but not necessarily a police record. So it's listening to, when you meet somebody and they say something to you like, "Yeah, I had this crazy ex-girlfriend and she used to really push my buttons, but she knew she was pushing my buttons." So there's somebody telling you they've got a history. There's somebody telling you they don't take responsibility for their own actions because they're blaming it on their crazy ex-girlfriend. So this is a risk assessment. It's a risk assessment. So, you're not convicting anybody of a crime. So you should take notice of that. But what that first stage also tells us is that these people who are more likely to kill are a type. So it's not just anyone, it's a type. And if you can recognize the type as early as you possibly can, that's got to be helpful. Knowledge is power. And in the second stage, I call that like the commitment whirlwind. So it's in that stage, you've just met somebody who maybe has a history of domestic abuse or being very controlling. They will more than likely push the relationship to start very, very quickly. They want things to move to a stage where you're in a committed relationship as quickly as they can. Now, if you are as invested in that as they are, and you feel yourselves to be in love, all of the danger signs tend to get hidden. But it's more about how intensely invested they are. But what they are really wanting to achieve is to get you to commit to them. And what we found was, once you've given that commitment, you can't withdraw it. But you wouldn't know that as a victim or as somebody who's just met this person. So the danger of that can bypass you completely. And very quickly, stage 2 will turn into stage 3. And stage 3 is a relationship dominated by coercive control. So that may be violent, it may not be violent, but it will be controlling. Some people use the violence as a method of control, and it's a very effective method of control. So if somebody's hitting you, strangling you, even pulling your hair, pushing you around, sitting on you so you can't move, all of those things are considered to be violence, but they are there to make sure that you are compliant, that you do as you are told. And that's how the relationship will play out. Stage 4 is when something happens to challenge that control. So they've established all this control with you, they've made you compliant, and all of a sudden you don't want to be in the relationship anymore. And that's what we call a trigger. The single biggest trigger across the world is separation. So if you want to leave the relationship, that's what generally will push things onto stage 5. Now, stage 5 is where there's been a challenge. We'll just say it's separation. There are more, but we haven't got all night. And the person will try to get you back, probably. So they will escalate all of their control tactics. So that might be begging, it might be crying, it might be threats to kill themselves, it might be violence. It's more than likely going to include stalking. And it may be all of those things, one after the other, a kind of scattergun approach. Now, stage 5 is absolutely pivotal because most people don't go past stage 5. Stage 5 is the point at which most controlling people will stop. So they either go, either the relationship ends and they go back to stage 1, being somebody with a history, looking for their next partner, or you stay with them, you decide not to leave them, and then it just circles back to stage 3. So you're back in that relationship dominated by control. The more dangerous thing is if it moves on to stage 6. Now, a lot of people don't like to think of domestic abuse as anything other than, domestic homicide as anything other than a crime of passion. And a crime of passion is often described as spontaneous violence, couldn't be predicted. They had an argument, the violence went too far, somebody ended up dead, and it wasn't really planned. That's not how these things are playing out at all. And that was one of the more shocking things that we found from the research, is that they go through stage 6 and 7. So 6 is what we call a change in thinking. And Russell and Rebecca Dobash put it perfectly in their domestic abuse research when they said the kind of the plan changes from keeping that person in the relationship to punishing them for leaving it. And so that I think that sums it up perfectly. They have this change in thinking where they right, we're not getting back together. I can see that. This is irretrievable now. How am I going to resolve these feelings of humiliation and rejection and anger and entitlement that I have? And it's at this stage that they might actually decide that homicide is the answer for them. And 7 is the planning stage. People are always shocked to find that most intimate partner homicides are planned. We want to think that they're spontaneous fits of anger, but they really aren't. And in stage 7, we've seen things like murder kits, Google searches on how to kill somebody, all sorts of things. And of course, stage 8 is the homicide. Could be a homicide, suicide. Children could be killed. Family members, other family members who get in the way or whatever. So that's the very basic 8 stages.
Which of those stages, when you explain them to people who have maybe working or studying in policing and other areas, which of them surprises people the most in your experience?
The planning stage. Most people think it doesn't exist. They don't want to think it exists. They don't want to think that people in a marriage or a relationship would be thinking about killing the other person. And we really do cling on to this idea of the crime of passion. It's been written into law even, hasn't it? It's the way it's always explained. If you look at the way these things play out in dramas and on television, it's always kind of, I loved her so much I killed her, or she made me so angry she pushed me to kill her. Unfortunately, the truth is much more sinister. And I suppose part of that is because we have an idea in our heads of what a murderer is, and it's not an ordinary person. But I would say, from the research I've done, that murder is, more than any other crime, the crime of ordinary people. We need to get past thinking that they're they somehow look different to us, or you'd know a murderer if you met one. You really wouldn't.
And you've also said that some people recognize themselves in this. Now, is that the victim? Is that the potential offender? Is it both? And what can they do with that? How could we use this to actually prevent something from escalating further?
Yeah, it was stunning to me that as soon as the research was published, the amount of women who said to me, that's me, that's my life. You just told my life. I'm at stage 5, I'm at stage 6, or I'm at stage 3. They all could immediately recognize it. I don't think I've heard anyone say yet, certainly who's either experienced domestic abuse or works in domestic abuse, that they don't recognize it. They do. All these things are right in front of our eyes all the time. But interestingly, you say the other side of it as well. I have had men say to me, I can see myself in that. I need to change.
So if it is such a, let's say, it's such a common phenomenon in relationships, and I'm not saying relationships that go wrong, because by definition most relationships end, and you know, everyone who's even in a happy relationship, they've had several relationships that ended. I don't see that as failing, you know, as we learn, you know, just like we have one job and then another job, and or move house, and you know, you learn from each relationship, and I don't see a failure or success in any of that. But if it's such a common phenomenon in relationships between two intimate partners that many people will think, well, hang on, yeah, I sort of see myself in that, or I've done that, then how do we differentiate between that being a relatively common, normal, whether good or bad, but normal trait of a relationship, to actually there's now something sinister going on?
If it's sinister, the sinister person will be very controlling. They will not, they have certain traits. So this does not apply to all relationships in any way, shape or form. So we all feel a bit jealous sometimes. We all maybe use micro controls maybe on our partners sometimes. You know, that's the way relationships go, isn't it? I'm talking about patterns of control. So the person is routinely jealous, routinely possessive, routinely will not ask, but really demand of their partner that they don't do certain things, that they behave in a certain way. And if they don't, there will be consequences. That isn't the normal run of a loving relationship. So if you can recognize these traits at stage 1, before you get into a relationship with this person where your lives have become entwined and it's very difficult to leave, and there may be children, you know, it all becomes very complicated, doesn't it? Routine jealousy is never healthy, ever, ever. We've got to stop saying that routine jealousy is okay and normal. It isn't. Jealousy now and again is. That's human, isn't it?
So what do you mean by routine jealousy? So just so we're clear about the difference between normal, acceptable jealousy and routine jealousy.
Normal, acceptable jealousy would happen in maybe small incidents over the course of a relationship. So maybe, you know, you go to the pub one night and your ex is in there and you've been chatting to that person. Maybe your partner will on that evening become jealous. I think that's perfectly acceptable and perfectly understandable. How they deal with that will tell you a lot. If they want to punish you for it, that's bad. But routine jealousy is things like wanting to control what you do so that person never gets jealous, if you like. So I call it the jealousy code. It comes in stage 2, and it'll be things like, oh, do you know, I love you so much. It just makes me feel so passionate. You know, when you talk to other men, it really upsets me. Can you not do that? And you'll probably say, well, okay, then. But then there'll be something else. I don't, you know, when you wear those clothes, or your friends, they're a bad influence on you, you know, they don't know you like I do. So if it's this constant, all the time, trying to get you to change things you do in the name of it makes me jealous, that is not healthy. That is very unhealthy. And it's a big red flag for the future. And so is loyalty. So jealousy and loyalty. So prove your loyalty to me. Prove your loyalty to me all the time. You know, your mum doesn't like me. Your mum hates me. Every time you're with your mum, you change. You're different. And then it becomes, I've got to choose between my mum and this person. And that's a loyalty test. But all of these things have consequences to them, and it's the consequences that will tell you how controlling this person is. They won't let things go. They've got to win.
Maybe at this stage it would be good if you could give us a quick definition of coercive control, because here in the UK, for example, it's a relatively recent crime. What is it, 2-3 years that it was actually put into legislation? I think it was a November, but I'm not sure exactly when.
It was 2015, the Serious Crimes Act.
Yeah. And can you just give us a definition of that, just so, because maybe it's, you know, there might be people from other countries watching this video and it might be called something else and it might not even be part of the law yet.
Well, coercive control as a pattern of behavior has been around for millennia. We have now acknowledged how dangerous it is, and that is why it is now illegal in some countries. But if you want it in just a couple of sentences, what coercive control is, so one of the Evan Stark says it's basically creating a hostage situation, something akin to a hostage situation. So you're kind of trapped. So what coercive control does, it traps you in a relationship. That's the quickest, easiest way to understand what is going on in coercive control. The environment is being created so that you cannot leave.
Could you give us some symptoms or markers or signal that maybe an outside person might be able to recognize? Because they might not know that maybe their friend, their neighbor, their family member is trapped, but they may perhaps notice some of these signals you're going to list.
Well, I think people do. When coercive control is at a stage where it really is frightening somebody or trapping them, usually friends and family have got an inkling. You kind of know, but you don't necessarily know what you're seeing, because if you're not seeing black eyes, most people think there's no domestic abuse. So how free is your friend to do the things they want to do? Are they free to see you whenever they like? Are they free to see their families whenever they like? Now, in some cases they are, because the perpetrator will make sure that they're there as well. They ingratiate themselves with the family. But it's okay. Can you see these people on your own? Can you go out on your own? Does this person have to take you there and pick you up? You're not allowed to get a taxi. You're not allowed to look after yourself. Can you have your own money, for example? Can you get the job you want? Can you work the hours you want? If you can't do the things that you usually do, for example, if you've arranged to go out with your friend and suddenly they can't, or they keep looking at their watch, or there's texts going constantly all the time you're out with them, these are signs that they are being controlled.
And what are the major problems with investigating these kind of crimes now that they have been determined crimes, finally?
Yeah, we're having a lot of teething problems with coercive control as an offence. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. Coercive control and stalking are very similar in the way that they've been written into the law, in that they are course of conduct offences. So most of our legislation is about incident-based offences. You committed a burglary, you stole something, it's an incident. But coercive control is a pattern of behaviour. So what you have to prove is the pattern and not an incident. And we don't train police officers awfully well because we've only got a few offences that are course of conduct. And they don't necessarily always know where to look to get the evidence for the pattern. And it won't be asking people what they've seen. You know, if say the police have been called, because they usually get called because there's been some violence, and coercive control can be very violent. Gathering evidence of that incident will not prove coercive control for you. So you have to do a lot more legwork. You have to, you know, look into the history. You have to see where this has been disclosed. You have to get evidence of entrapment, which can be difficult, but you know, we're getting better. They just had a case in Ireland, in fact, where a man was convicted of coercive control. He just got 10 years. So, you know, we're starting to take this very seriously, and the training is starting to come in for the police much better than it was when the legislation was first brought in.
Mm-hmm. What is it that you're hoping to achieve with your book? What do you think, what would you like to see happen when this becomes more and more public knowledge that actually it is not chaotic? You've looked at, 400 cases and you've extracted a pattern?
Mm-hmm. Well, I want victims and professionals to recognize the structure. The more they internalize that structure, the more they will recognize the offense when it happens, and the more they will recognize what evidence they need to collect to be able to get a conviction. And I think, okay, so it's written as a paper. Not everybody is going to read an academic paper, but lots and lots of people will read a book. And the book is kind of more about showing coercive control through case studies, watching real people, how it played out for them, and the kinds of ways they were controlled, so that we can look inside the front door, because this is always behind closed doors, isn't it? So we can open the door and have a look in and start to recognize coercive control. There's a really good book called The Gift of Fear, and it's by Gavin de Becker. I would recommend anybody to read that book. It's not about domestic abuse. There is a chapter on domestic abuse, but it's about recognizing danger signs in our lives and how to keep ourselves safe, and how fear really is a gift to us. If we listen to our fear, if we listen to our instincts, then we can possibly keep ourselves more safe. But one of the more important things, I think, that what I was coming to is, he said, it's not about seeing is believing. Sometimes you have to believe before you can see. So if you don't know what coercive control looks like and you don't believe it's there, you won't see it. But once you know what it is, then you will see it. And that's where the change comes in.
I think some of the aspects of this coercive control and also jealousy can sometimes be disguised as love. And, you know, he wants to be with me all the time, or she wants to be with me all the time. And, you know, it just breaks her heart or his heart when they see me with talking to members of the other sex. And, you know, he doesn't want me to take a cab late at night. He wants to pick me up and drop me off. He's so caring, so sweet. And in some cases that will be the case. And but like you say, you sort of need to look at the whole thing. And I think with what you called, you know, the constant jealousy, it's maybe it's not saying something every day, but saying something that affects something in your regular life, that, you know, whom you see, what you do, what you wear, how you speak to people, whom you're allowed to speak to. And I think especially, I wonder if especially young people are maybe more susceptible to thinking that this is actually, to mistake this for love and, you know, sweetness and caring, and, you know, he just wants me all to himself, rather than, well, hang on, you know, you are your own person, the world is your oyster, and, you know, this person shouldn't be getting to control you.
There was a domestic abuse activist in the States called Ellen Pence, and she identified 3 questions that you can ask yourself to kind of assess whether there's coercive control. So the first question is this a pattern, right? Not a one-off incident. Okay, we've had a fight at a wedding and it got out of hand, but it's never happened before and it's never likely to happen again. Is this a pattern? So that's the first question. Is this happening all the time? The second question is, do I change what I do so that I don't upset this person? If you're changing what you wear, who you speak to, how you are, how you feel about yourself, where you go, that's the second one. You've got a problem. And the third question is, am I afraid of my partner? Am I afraid that if I don't do as I'm told, or if I upset them, or if I challenge them, there will be consequences? That's the third question. So if you answer yes to all those 3 things, you could be being controlled. So and if they're all present, you do have a problem. You absolutely do have a problem. And then think, okay, I don't want to upset him. I hear this phrase more than any other, really. It's not worth it. It's not worth upsetting him. Why isn't it worth upsetting him? Well, because of what will happen if I do that. It's better just to stay in line. It's better just not to upset him. That is a real problem. That means you're frightened. That means you're frightened of the consequences of upsetting this person. And that's question 3. It's really, this stuff is really important.
Is this, do you think recognizing all these nuances and all these signs, not in isolation, but being able to pull them together, is something that could be taught to maybe investigators and the police?
Yes, absolutely. I am already training the police in these 8 stages, and they've been so interested in it, really interested in it, because it's helping them in their risk assessment processes. So they can look at the timeline and say, well, where are you on this? Where is this person on this timeline? Has there been a separation? Yikes! We need perhaps to give this a lot more attention. How is it circling back to stage 3 when maybe the danger goes down a little bit, but as there's another challenge, then the danger goes up again. So the police, the police are finding it really useful, but also the other professionals that are apart from probation officers as well, people like that, the professionals that are using it a lot, domestic violence specialists are using it, especially in talking to victims about their situation and explaining to them what's happening to them and why it's happening to them. And it can be so empowering.
Well, I'm glad you're saying that, because we're actually talking about developing a course together that that sort of brings this to the masses, to mainly the professional masses, but anyone who thinks this might be relevant for them to know about. So, which is really exciting. In summary, can you just repeat what those stages are? If you just whiz through them again,
there's
a lot of information in there.
Yeah. So in the book, I dedicate a whole chapter to each stage. And if you look at the paper, the academic paper, it's one that's fairly easy to read. But the stages are: 1, history; 2, things move too fast; 3, you're being controlled; 4, there's a challenge to that control, like a separation; 5 is an escalation in control as they try to get you back into the relationship; 6 is where perhaps they feel everything's irretrievable and they just can't let it go and they need to resolve it somehow; 7 is planning; 8 is homicide. But as I said, most people do break off at stage 5.
Break off as in they accept the separation and move on to the next relationship where
they will be controlling.
Yeah, where they think, well, you know, again, another ex was just pushing my buttons, and you know,
you become the crazy ex.
Yeah, exactly. If you could wave a magic wand to make one change in policing, what would it be?
Magic wand would be give domestic abuse more status. It's a very low status crime. Everybody still I hear it's a domestic. I don't want to hear that ever again. These are dangerous people. If we were talking about a serial killer, nobody would be minimizing it. And yet the rate of death from intimate partner homicide is way above serial killers. We need to give them more state. This is a proper, serious, dangerous crime. Give it more status.
Mm-hmm. And if people only took one thing away from this talk, what would you want it to be?
Depends who you are, I think. There may be victims listening, and I would say if you recognize yourself in anything that I've said, tell someone, get some support, stay safe. If you're a professional, please use the 8 stages. We've got a poster you can have. We've got lots of tools that you can use. We've got online training resources, lots of stuff. Please use it. You're not going to lose anything by using it.
Jane Monckton-Smith, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. I hope you found this content useful. You can get access to each episode's transcript with key learning points, timestamps, and references if you get yourself onto my mailing list. Just go to the main website on policesciencedoctor.com, and on the bottom of each page you will find a sign-up form for notifications of new content. Just enter your first name, your preferred email address, and the type of organization you work for. You will not get any spam. This is just for me to let you know about new content and for you to get access to all the transcripts.